TVGrace presents the inexpressible words of God, the gospel of grace, on the lips of Jesus Christ man. Abba, Father.
Well, so then let's go to the advice of the Word of God. First letter to Timothy. I was impacted tremendously. So in all of this week, we've been speaking of finances and of money. I respect tremendously because I receive a lot. I'm careful in over-motivating people to give because I want them to give what's correct, because I don't like to psychologically motivate them to take advantage of them so they can give more than what they need to. That's why I never ask for money on radio or do marathons. Never. We've always invest, right? What we give here, well, we share it. But this week I received that there are many folks that hear us and that they've never had that opportunity. People that have stopped coming for reasons we don't understand, but they separate their tithe, and it's in their best interest. Because as we saw in our conference, Christ was aware of what one gives. It says that Cornelius was an offering that gave lots of offerings. It says that his offerings went to the presence of God because God sees the intent of the heart. God sees many things that we're going to see here in this verse. Look at what it says. In chapter 6, first letter to Timothy, verse 10. I've never seen this verse in the way I am looking at it now as to how Paul spoke to Timothy. It says, for the love of money is the root of all evil, for which some have strayed, idolizing, as if to say, because covetousness is idolatry. They strayed from the faith in their greediness and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. That called and drew my attention because there are people that love money. They idolize it. And we understand that the best thing to break away from that is sowing, it's giving. But now it says that it is the root not only of one evil, but all evil. It seems like this is what destroys families. For an example, there are people that love money so much that they don't ever give for good causes, for kids or international charitable gifts that are just a just purpose. They give nothing. So then they accomplish themselves in getting lots of money, but since that is the root of all evil, they don't enjoy it, because since that root has arisen in the midst of their minds, it's causing such a stumbling block in such a way. So they've got the ability to gather lots of money, but because of that root of bitterness in the midst of that individual, well, Saturday came around and he doesn't know what to do. And Sunday comes around and he does nothing, or he begins to argue, or something happens, there's a problem or there's an accident, and years go by and the person never enjoys anything. So then the science of sowing is that the angels, on account of your attitude, the angels seek a way for you to enjoy life, that you are at peace, because tranquility is a fruit of the Spirit. Sometimes, you know that there are people that waste their lives. I've noticed how God begun to break me down. For an example, when I was married, there were many gifts we were given that remind us of many things, the cups, the silverware, and you begin to, especially the wives, that they begin to save the first pair of shoes of the baby and the first haircut, they gather the hair and keep that. Suddenly they direct them lives in a series of material things that are very good, but that suddenly their lives evolves in what they possess, and they begin to idolize those things. And they are so bound to the city, to the environment, to the friends, that suddenly there's a moment where they need to move, and they say, no, we can't, because we are going to lose our friends, our job. I can't. So I remember that I've moved so many times on account of the ministry. I moved 22 times in 20 years. And in one of my moves, the cups would break. And in another moves, half of the silverware would disappear, and the shoes would be lost, and the books would get wet. And when I opened my eyes, I had nothing of what I owned. Everything was new. So that begun to break me down in such a way that suddenly whenever it was time to leave, I'd give everything up. The only thing I would carry out was whatever I can gather in several luggages, because sometimes you would send it out and pack and send it out through mail, or you carry it out on your flight, but things began to wither. And I didn't notice what God was doing. And what he was doing was putting my eyes on the things that were permanent, which are lives. So the church, God sometimes chooses people and he breaks them. He causes them to lose everything. And they have a love only the things that are permanent, to help people, to educate people, to edify people. But I didn't know that the love for money can cause so many horrible experiences. And let me tell you, it isn't that you shouldn't possess wealth and have an account and administer your finances. We're not saying that, but that it possesses you in a way that you cannot give the Lord, that you can't give for principles of the gospel, then that becomes idolatry, and it becomes a problem for your life. As a matter of fact, I think God has you cornered, surrounded. As a matter of fact, it's time that you leave the church and here no longer, because God doesn't want a relationship with a person that has covetousness, because he is committing idolatry. And God says that those that commit idolatry will not inherit the kingdom of heaven. God does more with very little than with many. You know, there are churches here in Miami that gathered over 2,000 to 3,000 people. Now, they will never receive the funds we receive here with very few, naturally, because they don't have the same mindset of outreach we do. It's like a child you have. When he grows out of his clothing, you say, well, his clothing don't fit, so let's get him a new wardrobe. Imagine if your child didn't consume nourishment, food. You're going to celebrate, oh, how precious that the baby doesn't eat because I can save money. To the contrary, you would be concerned that your child doesn't eat. No, you are excited because he's growing, he's eating a lot. This ministry demands a lot. And it's that our mind is a mind for outreach. That's why we don't only think of ourselves here in Miami, we think of the world. We can have back here cascades, water coming down from a mountain. There are churches that they paint a beautiful picture behind the pulpit. But our mind is set on outreach. That's why we have a map here. It is to say that to give is an experience and it's a mystery. Imagine that you giving are receiving. Imagine if you give, you think you would have less, right? But that's a mystery. When you give, the angels begin to do certain maneuvers to prosper you. I remember when I used to belong to the system, I used to go to Sunday school, and they would give us a class before the main conference that evening. This man that would give classes, his wife was blind, and he had 4 children. So what happens? People would always save their offering for the main service, but when they would gather offerings in the Bible class, people would drop change. And I remember when he would hear change being dropped in the basket, he'd say, no, you can't be dropping no change here. You should drop dollars. You should sow dollars. That's for religious mass out there with Catholicism. And I would be bothered a little, because how can this man be telling people not to give change? When you're new, you notice many things that bother you. But then one day I spoke to the pastor and I said, listen, what's this? That this man, people put change and he's telling them they must give dollars. And the pastor said, it's that he loves this ministry and he loves the word and he wants you to be well. If he's teaching you to give, that means he's a good teacher. So then I understood and became to know that he was the one that most sold and gave. And then I discovered he had the best house and the best automobile in the church. Out there in Massachusetts, when the Latinos began to arrive, and I said, man, why? And he wouldn't collect offerings for him because he had his own job. He would give for the needs of the property they owned. He was a giver, and since he was a giver, he always had. I don't know what the Lord may be ministering to you, but I don't want that any root of this evil touch any of our families here. If I love you, well, I don't want anything wrong to happen to you. But it says they were pierced through with many sorrows. A person that doesn't give is pierced with pain. He loses here, he loses over there. You see them always whining and complaining. And the more he has, the more he wants. He makes people's lives impossible. It's because that ruins your personality. When you surrender your mind to this doctrine, everything changes. A mind that doesn't surrender to this doctrine, it's a mind that's not free. It's worried. It has concerns. But when you say, I believe, I receive, this is the truth, then suddenly all of the tissues from your face get organized. Yes. It's as if you enter God's rest. I've surrendered. But while you're being challenged, the person ages. Don't you see that God made you in a form that you may receive this advice of love? Is that this advice is going to do good for you. That's why we receive so many testimonies. As that call that came in on the radio program, just because we crossed her from before the cross to after the cross, her mind entered God's rest. Our super race, I received many letters, and when I'm traveling, I read them, and they say, thank you for saving my life. in fear, and I could not sleep with the lights off. Many testimonies. Now I'm free. I was afraid of the love of my parents' children. Many testimonies. I have witnessed when I travel. Marvelous things. And what I said recently, that this man that used to come to our church here, that suddenly he stopped coming, and I would ask myself, why does so-and-so, why did he stop coming? And I remember when he arrived here, he had an old vehicle, and all of a sudden he prospered and he began to buy different trucks. He was a general contractor, and when he would go buy supplies, he says, man, everybody is complaining. And that's all he would hear, people at Home Depot complaining. But he would always confess, no, I'm prosperous. I know that I'll have the best jobs. And that's what he began to do, was receive according to his confession. But when they would raise up an offering, he wouldn't give. Why? Because he was afraid of the future, him lacking. Because if he gave, he thought he would not receive. And it fell for him when he stopped coming. And the Lord told me, I removed him. Because when I prospered him, he didn't want to share of the riches that he's been blessed with. That the love of money, the root, doesn't ever affect you. Don't never allow money to possess you. So be a cheerful giver, because you're going to see the results of your seed. You're going to see it in your marital relationship, in all your areas. Finance are going to liberate you for being a sower, because you're going to have the angels happy with you.